"Send her away before he arrives," my stepmother said. Her voice, a low hiss of polished steel, meant only for my father's ear. It was, however, a whisper that found me with the unerring accuracy of a well-aimed dart. The words slid under my skin, another small sharp cut in a tapestry of 1,000 others. I stood in my designated corner of the ballroom, a shadow in dove-gray silk, positioned precisely between a towering funereal urn of ferns and a drape of heavy velvet that smelled of dust and time. This was my place, the place of the forgotten daughter, the quiet footnote in the glittering story of my stepsister, Lavinia. I did not need to see my stepmother, Lady Anya, to picture her. Her lips would be a tight, bloodless line, a stark contrast to the practiced smile she reserved for society. My father, I knew, would offer no protest. His spine had long ago been dissolved by his desire for a peaceful life, a quiet that I was apparently born to disturb. He would simply nod, his gaze sliding away, and the matter would be settled. I was a piece of inconvenient furniture to be shifted out of sight when important company was expected. And there was no company more important than the Duke of Vance. The air in the ballroom was thick with anticipation, heavy with the scent of beeswax and wilting roses. It crackled with the collective, unspoken ambition of every mother with a marriageable daughter. The Duke was a legend, a creature of myth more than a man, impossibly wealthy, powerful beyond measure, and reclusive to the point of outright hostility. The Iron Duke, they called him, a man forged in some cold northern fire, left severe and unbending. He rarely graced London with his presence, and his appearance tonight had sent a shockwave through the ton. For him to attend a ball at Ashworth House was a coup of such magnitude that my stepmother had been vibrating with a terrifying, triumphant energy for weeks, an energy that did not, under any circumstances, include me. I watched Lavinia across the room. She was a vision in cream and gold, a sunbeam given human form. Laughter spilled from her easily, and she moved with a liquid grace that drew every eye. She was not cruel, my stepsister. Her crime was a simpler one, a profound and lifelong obliviousness. She saw me as one sees a familiar chair or a settled portrait on the wall, there but not truly present. My misery, my isolation, was a language she did not speak. In her world of light and admiration, my silent, gray existence was simply incomprehensible. Lady Anya glided towards me, her smile a brittle weapon. "Ilara, dear," she began, the endearment a tiny, poisoned confection. "There is such a dreadful draught in this corner. You will catch a chill. Why don't you find a seat in the morning room? You can finish that dreary book you were reading." It was not a suggestion. It was an exile. The morning room was 2 corridors away, a cold, forgotten space where the discarded furniture went to die. She was not sending me away for my health. She was burying me alive before the guest of honor could arrive and have his view tainted by my plain, unremarkable presence. I felt the familiar burn behind my eyes, the hot shame that was my constant companion. I wanted to protest, to say something, anything, to claim my small patch of air in this house that was supposed to be my home. But the words were stones in my throat. Years of being told I was in the way, too quiet, a disappointment, had built a prison of silence around me, and I had forgotten where to find the key. I simply nodded, my gaze fixed on a loose thread on the velvet curtain. My compliance was her victory. She gave a small, satisfied sigh and turned away, her mission accomplished. I took a deep breath, preparing to execute my own retreat, to perform the vanishing act she had commanded. I would slip away and no one would notice. It was the one skill I had perfected. But as I turned, a tremor went through the room. A sudden, profound silence fell, swallowing the music and the chatter whole. The sea of glittering guests parted like water before a prophet. He had arrived. The Duke of Vance stood in the arched doorway, and the room seemed to shrink around him. He was taller than I had imagined, dressed in unforgiving black that seemed to absorb the candlelight. His face was all harsh lines and stark angles, as if carved from granite. There was no softness in him. His eyes, a startlingly pale gray, swept the room with an unnerving stillness, an expression of such profound boredom it bordered on contempt. This was not a man who had come to be entertained. This was a man who had come to pass judgment. My stepmother was instantly at his side, my father a half-step behind her. Her voice was honeyed, her posture a study in deferential grace. I could not hear her words, but I saw the Duke's slight, dismissive nod. His gaze continued its slow, inexorable sweep of the room. It passed over Lavinia's brilliant smile without a flicker of interest. It dismissed the hopeful, simpering faces of a dozen other young ladies. His eyes, cold and analytical, moved past the glittering chandeliers, the laden banquet tables, the straining musicians. And then they found me. For a single, heart-stopping second, his gaze locked with mine across the crowded space. There was no warmth in it, no recognition. It was the dispassionate focus of a hawk spotting something out of place in the landscape. I saw myself through his eyes, a gray mouse cowering in the shadows. The shame was so acute it felt like a physical blow. I flinched, my eyes dropping back to the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I prayed for the floor to open and swallow me. I heard my stepmother's voice again, closer now, laced with a frantic edge. "Your Grace, may I present my daughter Lavinia?" But the Duke was already moving. He was not moving towards the sunbeam in cream and gold. He was walking, with a slow, deliberate purpose, directly towards my corner. Towards the ferns and the velvet curtain, towards me. The silence in the room deepened, becoming a ringing, breathless vacuum. Every eye followed him. I could feel their collective gaze like 1,000 tiny needles on my skin. I wanted to run, to disappear into the wall, but my feet were rooted to the spot. He was a force of nature, an oncoming storm, and I was a sapling in his path. Lady Anya's frantic, rustling sounds followed in his wake. "Your Grace, perhaps a glass of champagne, the music." He did not stop. He came to a halt directly in front of me, so close I could see the fine silver threads at his temples. He looked down at me, his expression utterly unreadable. The world ceased to exist outside the small circle of our shared space. And then he spoke, his voice a low, resonant baritone that cut through the suffocating silence. "Miss Ashworth," he said, and he was not looking at Lavinia, he was looking at me. "I was hoping to find you here." My stepmother's gasp was a small, sharp sound, like a string snapping. The blood drained from her face, leaving behind a mottled, furious mask. My father looked utterly bewildered, his mouth slightly agape. And I could not breathe. It was a dream, a hallucination, a cruel joke of the highest order. The Iron Duke, the most powerful man in the kingdom, had crossed a ballroom full of society's brightest jewels to speak to me, the shadow, the ghost at the feast. His pale eyes held mine, and for the first time in my life, I felt the terrifying, agonizing sensation of being truly, undeniably seen. My mind was a maelstrom of confusion. I searched his face for any sign of mockery, for the telltale glint of a cruel prank, but found none. There was only a grave, unnerving intensity. My throat was dry, my tongue a useless weight in my mouth. Words, which had always been my silent refuge in books and journals, abandoned me completely. "Your Grace," I managed to whisper, the sound so faint it was little more than a breath. "You are Alara Ashworth," he stated. It was not a question. The certainty in his voice was absolute, and it sent another tremor of shock through me. How did he even know my name? To my family, I was an afterthought. To society, I was invisible. To this man, this formidable, unapproachable Duke, I was a name, a person he had sought out. He extended a gloved hand. "You will permit me a turn about the room, Miss Ashworth." Again, it was not a question. It was a command wrapped in the thinnest veneer of courtesy. My hand, trembling slightly, rose as if of its own accord and rested on his arm. His touch was firm, impersonal, yet the fine wool of his coat felt like a brand through my thin glove. He turned, and with me on his arm, began to walk. The journey across the ballroom floor was the longest of my life. The silence had been replaced by a furious, sibilant wave of whispers. I felt hundreds of eyes on my back, dissecting me, questioning, judging. I could feel my stepmother's rage burning a hole between my shoulder blades. I kept my head down, my gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the parquet floor, wishing it would crack open and offer me sanctuary. "They seem surprised," the Duke observed, his voice pitched low for my ears alone. There was a dry, almost imperceptible note of amusement in his tone. "I am surprised, Your Grace," I admitted, my own voice tight with nerves. "Why?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that I looked up at him. His profile was severe, a study in planes and angles against the candlelight. "Because," I stammered, "I am no one of consequence." The admission felt like tearing a piece of my own soul out and offering it for inspection. It was the truth that had been drilled into me my entire life. He was silent for a long moment as we moved past a cluster of ladies whose faces were masks of stunned disbelief. "Consequence is a matter of opinion," he said finally, "not a decree. Tell me, Miss Ashworth, what do you think of the fan vaulting in this hall? It is a rather clumsy imitation of the style found at King's College Chapel, wouldn't you agree?" The abrupt shift in topic was dizzying. He was asking my opinion on architecture, the one subject that lived and breathed inside me, my secret world built of stone and light and history. The question was so specific, so arcane, it could not be simple ballroom chatter. "The Lierne ribs are too thick," I found myself saying, the words coming out before I could stop them. "They disrupt the upward sweep of the primary arches. It makes the ceiling feel heavy, oppressive, when it should feel like it is floating." A flicker of something, interest, approval, crossed his features. It was a subtle shift, a slight easing of the tension around his mouth. "Precisely," he said, oppressive, an excellent word. We completed our turn and arrived back at my forgotten corner. The ferns seemed to tremble in our wake. He did not release my arm. Instead, he turned to face my father and stepmother, who had materialized beside us, their expressions a chaotic mix of fury and sycophantic panic. "Lord Ashworth," the Duke said, his tone formal and cool, "with your permission, I should like to call upon your daughter tomorrow." My father blinked, utterly flummoxed. My daughter," he stuttered, his eyes flicking nervously from me to Lavinia, who stood nearby, looking completely bewildered. "Yes," the Duke said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Miss Alara Ashworth. Is that a problem?" No, of course not, Your Grace," Lady Anya interjected, her voice strained, her smile a horrifying rictus. "We would be honored, utterly honored." The Duke gave a curt nod. He then looked down at me, his pale eyes holding mine for a moment longer. "Until tomorrow, Miss Ashworth." He released my arm, bowed slightly, and turned on his heel. He strode from the ballroom without a backward glance, leaving a crater of stunned silence in his wake. The moment he was gone, the dam of my stepmother's restraint broke. She seized my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "What was that?" she hissed, her face contorted with a rage that was terrifying to behold. "What game are you playing, you stupid, scheming little creature?" I don't know," I whispered, the truth sounding feeble even to my own ears. "You do not know," she spat. "The Duke of Vance humiliates my family, humiliates Lavinia, by singling out a plain, wretched nobody, and you do not know? You will tell me what you did." But I had nothing to tell. Her accusations were nonsensical. I had done nothing. I had been nothing. I was a ghost, until he had looked at me and decided I was solid. I spent a sleepless night replaying the encounter, each word, each glance, dissecting it until it lost all meaning. It had to be a mistake, a case of mistaken identity, or worse, a sophisticated and cruel form of entertainment at my expense. Hope was a dangerous foreign country I had never dared to visit, and I could not bring myself to apply for a visa now. I fully expected a messenger to arrive in the morning with a note of cold apology, explaining the Duke's regrettable error. But no messenger came. Instead, at precisely 2 o'clock, the Duke of Vance's own black lacquered carriage, drawn by 4 perfectly matched grays, pulled up before our door. My stepmother had confined me to my room, but I watched from the window, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. She had spent the morning coaching Lavinia, certain that the Duke had simply been confused, that upon seeing Lavinia's beauty in the clear light of day, he would realize his mistake. I was summoned to my father's library, a room I loved for its scent of leather and paper, a place where I had spent countless hours in quiet solitude. Today, it felt like an execution chamber. Lady Anya stood beside the fireplace, rigid with tension. Lavinia was perched prettily on a settee. My father paced nervously by the window. When the butler announced the Duke, he entered the room and the air immediately grew colder, more formal. He gave a perfunctory nod to my family, his gaze sweeping past them as if they were part of the furniture. His eyes found me where I stood by the bookshelves. "Miss Ashworth," he said, his voice as calm and steady as it had been the night before. "I trust you are well." "I am, Your Grace," I managed. Lady Anya cleared her throat, stepping forward. "Your Grace, my daughter Lavinia was just about to play the pianoforte." "I did not come to hear the pianoforte," the Duke cut in, his tone sharp enough to slice through her syrupy words. He did not even look at her. His focus remained entirely on me. "I have come to continue our conversation." He gestured to the two chairs by the cold hearth. "If you would." It was a dismissal of everyone else in the room, a soft but undeniable command. After a moment of sputtering, indignant silence, my father cleared his throat and herded a seething Lady Anya and a confused Lavinia from the room, closing the heavy oak doors behind them. The silence he left behind was profound. It was just the two of us, the most powerful man in England and me. I sat stiffly on the edge of the chair, my hands clenched in my lap. I was still waiting for the trap to spring, for the punchline of this elaborate joke. He did not sit immediately. He walked to the bookshelves, his long fingers trailing over the spines. "Your father has a respectable collection," he noted, "but it is poorly curated. Too much fashionable poetry, not enough substance." He paused, pulling out a slim, anonymously bound volume. "Except for this." He turned and held it out. My blood ran cold. It was a copy of the Architectural Review, an obscure, scholarly journal. He opened it to a specific page, an article titled "Structural Integrity and Aesthetic Principles of Roman Aqueducts." An article I had written. An article I had submitted under the pen name A.E. Castor. "A.E. Castor," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a judge's verdict. A clever pseudonym, initials and an anagram for arches. Very literary. I found the analysis of the Pont du Gard's voussoirs particularly insightful. The author argued that their irregular size was not a flaw, but a deliberate engineering choice to distribute stress. A theory I had not encountered before. I could not speak. My secret was laid bare. This was the one part of myself I had kept sacred, the one place my stepmother's scorn could not reach. My intellectual life lived out in quiet libraries and in the pages of journals no one she knew would ever read. "How?" I whispered. "I have a passing interest in the subject," he said, a masterpiece of understatement. His own collection of architectural treatises was rumored to be the finest in the country. I was intrigued by the article. The prose was clear, the arguments precise. It was not the work of a dilettante. I made some inquiries of the publisher, a man who owes me a small favor. He was reluctant, but eventually conceded the author was not the elderly academic I had supposed, but a Miss Elara Ashworth. He closed the journal and placed it carefully on the table between us. He finally took his seat, his pale gray eyes fixed on my face. "So, you see, Miss Ashworth," he said softly, "it was not a mistake. I knew exactly who I was looking for last night. I came to your family's ball for the sole purpose of meeting the mind that wrote this article. I did not expect to find its owner hidden behind a potted fern." The world tilted on its axis. All my fears, all my suspicions of mockery and cruel games dissolved into nothing. He had not seen a plain girl in a gray dress. He had not seen a social failure or a poor relation. He had seen a mind. He had read my thoughts on paper and found them worthy of his time. He had sought out the person I was on the inside, the person no one else had ever bothered to look for. A single hot tear escaped my eye and traced a path down my cheek. I brushed it away angrily. I would not cry in front of him. It felt like a weakness I could not afford. "Why?" I asked, the word raw. "Why go to such trouble?" "Because," he said, leaning forward slightly, his expression serious. "Intelligence is the rarest of commodities, Miss Ashworth, and genuine insight is rarer still. I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who speak without thinking. To find someone who thinks before they write, it is an event worth investigating." Over the next few weeks, my life transformed. The Duke became a regular visitor. He did not send flowers or chocolates, the typical currency of courtship. His gifts were of a different, more profound nature. A folio of Piranesi's engravings of Rome arrived one morning. A note followed, asking for my opinion on the structural feasibility of a bridge design for his northern estate. He invited me, along with a reluctant and glowering Lady Anya as chaperone, to view his private library at Vance House. Walking into that library was like walking into a cathedral of thought. It was a vast, two-story room, lined from floor to ceiling with books. A scent of old paper and beeswax hung in the air. Sunlight streamed through a high, arched window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sprites. While my stepmother sat stiffly by the door, radiating disapproval, the Duke led me through the aisles. He showed me first editions of Vitruvius and Palladio, ancient maps drawn on vellum, delicate architectural sketches by Wren. Our conversations were not the stilted, formal affairs of society. We argued about the merits of the Gothic versus the Baroque. We debated the political implications of civic architecture. We spoke of history, of philosophy, of the weight of the past on the present. In these conversations, I forgot to be the timid, silent Ilara. I was a scholar, an equal. He would listen intently, his head tilted slightly, his gaze never leaving my face as I spoke. He would challenge my assumptions, push me to defend my arguments, and a fierce, exhilarating joy would rise in me. I felt my mind, so long kept in a dark, quiet room, stretching and unfurling in the light of his attention. One afternoon, he took me to see the ruins of St. Giles Abbey, a crumbling monument on the edge of his estate. It was a wild, wind-swept place, the skeletal remains of arches reaching for a gray sky. We walked in silence for a time, the only sound the crunch of our boots on fallen leaves and the cry of a distant rook. "It was my brother's favorite place," he said suddenly, his voice rough. He had stopped before the remains of the high altar. He was younger than me, full of life. He saw beauty in everything, even in decay. I had heard the stories, of course, the tragic death of the Duke's heir, a fall from a horse. It was said the Duke had never recovered, that the accident had been the forge in which the Iron Duke was made. "He died here, Alistair. He had insisted I call him Alistair," said, his gaze fixed on the broken stones. "I was with him. I was supposed to be watching him. I was the older brother, the responsible one." His voice was low, taut with a grief that was still raw after all these years. "I inherited everything, the title, the lands, the responsibilities, a life I never wanted, and all it cost was his." The mask of the severe, unfeeling Duke had fallen away. In its place was a man drowning in a private sorrow, a guilt that had shaped the course of his entire life. I saw in his loneliness a reflection of my own, a different kind of prison, but a prison nonetheless. He had been isolated by his power and grief, just as I had been by my powerlessness and neglect. Without thinking, driven by an impulse of pure empathy, I reached out and laid my hand on his forearm. It was a small, simple gesture, but in our carefully circumscribed world, it was a transgression of immense proportion. He stiffened, his head snapping around to look at me. His pale eyes were dark with a turbulent emotion I could not name. I expected him to pull away, for the walls of his reserve to slam back into place. But he didn't. He looked down at my hand on his arm, then back to my face. A long, silent moment stretched between us, filled with the whisper of the wind through the ruins. Then, slowly, he covered my hand with his own. His grip was warm and firm. "Thank you, Alara," he said, his voice thick. It was in that moment, among the ruins of a forgotten abbey, that the ground shifted beneath my feet. This was no longer an intellectual companionship. A fragile, terrifying tendril of something more had taken root between us. Hope, which I had so long feared, began to bloom in the desolate landscape of my heart. My stepmother was not blind. She saw the change in me, the faint spark of life in my eyes that had not been there before. She saw the Duke's continued, inexplicable preference for my company over Lavinia's. Her ambition, thwarted and curdled, turned into a venomous, desperate poison. The more the Duke sought me out, the more her cruelty intensified in the quiet moments when we were alone. "Do you truly believe he would marry you?" she sneered one evening, cornering me in the hallway after he had departed. "A man like that? With a plain, penniless little mouse like you? He is amusing himself, Alara. You are a novelty, a pet project. When he tires of you, he will cast you aside, and you will be a laughingstock." Her words were designed to find the cracks in my newfound confidence, to plant seeds of doubt and fear, and they did. Late at night, alone in my room, the old insecurities would whisper to me. She was right. What could a man like him possibly see in me? It was an aberration, a temporary madness that would surely pass. But then a new book would arrive, or a note with a question only I could answer, and Alistair's quiet, steady belief in me would push the shadows back again. We were building something together, a fragile bridge of understanding and respect, and I began to believe it might actually be strong enough to bear weight. Lady Anya, however, was not one to leave things to chance. If her verbal barbs could not drive me back into my shell, she would resort to more direct, more destructive methods. Her campaign began with a letter. I knew nothing of it, of course, not until much later. It was a masterpiece of malicious invention, written on her finest stationery in a delicate flowing hand that suggested sincerity and grief. She wrote to the Duke not as an angry mother, but as a deeply concerned one. She spoke of my fragile mental state, my troubling flights of fancy. She hinted at a melancholy that ran in my late mother's family, a tendency towards hysteria and delusion. She fabricated a story of a secret, shameful attachment I had formed with a stable boy, an infatuation that had led to wild, untrue claims. She was writing, she claimed, only to protect him, to warn him away from a girl who was not what she seemed, a girl who was tragically, hopelessly unwell. She was painting a portrait of me as damaged goods, a liability he would be wise to discard. Simultaneously, she moved against me. She summoned me to the drawing room one morning, her expression one of grim satisfaction. My father was there, looking pale and uncomfortable. "Alara," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "we have allowed this association with the Duke to go on long enough. It is unseemly, and it is giving you ideas above your station. It is time for you to be settled." A cold dread washed over me. "Settled?" "Your father has accepted an offer of marriage on your behalf," she continued, her eyes glittering with triumph. "From Viscount Marlowe." The name struck me like a physical blow. Viscount Marlowe was an old man, nearly 3 times my age. He was notorious for his brutish nature, his coarse habits, and the suspicious speed with which he had gone through 2 previous wives. He was a monster from a cautionary tale. To be married to him would be a sentence of living death. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "Father, you cannot." I looked at my father, pleading with my eyes. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He just stared at a spot on the carpet, his face a mask of miserable weakness. "It is a good match, Alara," he mumbled. "He is a man of title." "He is a cruel man," I said, my voice rising with panic. "You know the stories." "The contracts are being drawn up," Lady Anya said, her tone final. "It is done. Your little fantasy with the Duke is over. You will be a viscountess. You should be grateful." I fled the room, my heart shattering in my chest. She had me trapped. It was a perfectly executed maneuver. By arranging this monstrous marriage, she would not only remove me as a threat to Lavinia, but also punish me for my audacity in daring to hope. She had built a cage and was about to throw the key into the deepest part of the ocean. I was to be sold, discarded, to a man who would surely destroy what little was left of me. The fragile bridge Alistair and I had been building seemed to fall into an abyss. My stepmother had been right all along. I was a fool. I did not hear from Alistair for 2 days. They were the longest 2 days of my life. Each tick of the clock was a step closer to Viscount Marlowe, to the end of everything. My stepmother's prophecy had come true. He had tired of me. Her letter, full of its venomous lies, must have worked. He had seen the truth of me and had, quite rightly, abandoned his foolish pet project. The silence from Vance House was a deafening confirmation of my worthlessness. On the 3rd day, a footman delivered a note. It was not from the Duke, but from my father, summoning me to Vance House. Lady Anya and my father were to have a meeting with the Duke regarding a matter of some urgency. My presence was also requested. My blood ran cold. This was it. This was the final, formal severing. He had likely invited me there to witness him give his blessing to my union with Marlowe, a final public humiliation. I dressed in my plainest gray dress, a shroud for my murdered hopes. The journey there was silent. Lady Anya was smug, radiating a triumphant energy. My father looked ill. I felt nothing but a hollow, aching emptiness. We were shown not to a drawing room, but to the Duke's library, the very room where he had first shown me that he saw me. The memory was a fresh, sharp pain. Alistair was standing by the large window, his back to us, staring out at the London rain. When he turned, his face was like a mask carved from ice. There was a dangerous stillness about him, a coiled tension that made the air in the room feel thin and sharp. "Lord Ashworth, Lady Anya," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Thank you for coming." He did not invite them to sit. His eyes found me, and for a fleeting second, the icy mask cracked, and I saw a flicker of something else. Concern, anger, a deep, turbulent emotion. Then it was gone. "Your Grace," my stepmother began, her voice oozing false concern. "I am so glad you have seen reason. My only thought was for your welfare in this delicate matter." Alistair walked slowly to the massive mahogany desk that dominated the center of the room. He picked up a letter from its polished surface. Her letter. "Your concern for my welfare is noted, Lady Anya," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "You wrote to me of Miss Ashworth's flights of fancy, her delusions. A mother's burden," she sighed, placing a hand over her heart. "She is a troubled child." "Indeed," the Duke said. He picked up another document from his desk. "It is a fascinating coincidence, then, that on the very day you were so concerned for my welfare, you and your husband were finalizing a marriage contract between Alara and Viscount Marlowe." He looked at my father, who visibly flinched. A man whose first 2 wives died within a year of their nuptials, both leaving him considerably wealthier. A man currently being investigated at my personal instigation for his role in their untimely deaths. Lady Anya's face went pale. I know nothing of that. He is a nobleman." "He is a brute and likely a murderer," Alistair cut in, his voice like the crack of a whip. "And you were going to sell your stepdaughter to him." He let the ugly words hang in the air. My father looked as though he was about to be sick. "And as for Alara's shameful attachment to a stable hand," the Duke continued, his gaze returning to my stepmother, "I also found that fascinating. My agent spoke to every member of your staff. They found no evidence of such a relationship. What they did find, however, was you, Lady Anya. They found a history of systematic emotional abuse, of isolation and belittlement. They heard you refer to Alara as a burden, a worthless creature, a millstone. These are not the words of a concerned mother." My stepmother's composure finally shattered. "She is nothing," she shrieked, her voice rising into a shrill, ugly thing. "A quiet, bookish little freak. She was supposed to be nothing. My Lavinia is the beauty. My Lavinia was supposed to be the Duchess. This little snake charmed you, bewitched you with her false modesty." Alistair did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His quiet, cold fury was more terrifying than any shouting. "The only snake in this room, madam, is you." He placed a final document on the desk. "This is an accounting of the dowry left to Miss Ashworth by her late mother. A modest sum, but one you have been illegally absorbing into your household accounts for the past 10 years. My solicitors have taken the liberty of drawing up papers that transfer control of that trust, with all due interest, to me, to be administered on Ilara's behalf. You will find you are no longer in a position to sell her to anyone." Lady Anya stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. She was utterly, comprehensively defeated. Every lie exposed, every scheme dismantled. She was ruined. And in that moment, seeing her stripped of her power, seeing her for the desperate, cruel woman she was, something inside me broke free. The years of silence, of swallowed words and stifled pain, fell away. I stepped forward. "You were wrong," I said, my voice quiet, but clear and steady. It rang with a strength I did not know I possessed. Lady Anya's head whipped around to face me, her eyes wild with hatred. "You told me I was a shadow," I continued, looking directly at her. "You told me I was invisible, worthless, a footnote in my own life. You worked so hard to make me believe it. You hid me in corners, you dressed me in gray, you silenced me every time I tried to speak. You built a prison for me out of your own ambition and fear. But a person is not a shadow just because you refuse to see them. A mind is not worthless just because you are incapable of understanding it." I turned to my father, who was weeping silently into his hands. "And you," I said, my voice softening with a deep, ancient sorrow rather than anger. "You let her. You chose your peace over your daughter. I forgive you for your weakness, but I will never forget it." Finally, I looked back at the woman who had caused me so much pain. "You did not break me, Lady Anya," I said. "You only taught me the value of silence. You taught me to live inside my own mind, a world you could never touch. And now, I am finished with it. I am finished with you." A profound silence filled the room after I spoke. It was the silence of utter devastation. Lady Anya was broken. My father was shamed. And I, for the first time in my life, felt free. Alistair gestured to the door. "I believe your business here is concluded," he said to my father. My father nodded, unable to speak, and guided his trembling, defeated wife from the room. I heard Lavinia's voice in the hall, questioning, and then a horrified gasp as the story was surely relayed. The heavy library doors closed, leaving Alistair and me alone once more. The adrenaline that had fueled my speech drained away, leaving me trembling. The full weight of the confrontation, of the years of pain I had finally given voice to, washed over me. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling suddenly small and fragile. Alistair was beside me in an instant. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a warm, solid anchor in the swirling storm of my emotions. "Ilara," he said, his voice gentle. I looked up at him, my eyes swimming with unshed tears. "You did all of that, for me." "I did," he confirmed, "but do not mistake me, I did not rescue you just now. You rescued yourself, that voice, that strength, that has been inside you all along. I merely provided the venue for you to finally use it." He reached out then, and gently brushed a stray tear from my cheek with his thumb. His touch was electric, a jolt of warmth and tenderness that shot through my entire being. "I have spent my life in rooms filled with noise, Ilara," he said, his pale eyes searching my face. "Meaningless chatter, flattery, ambition, it is all just noise. With you, I have found a silence that is more meaningful than any conversation, a quiet space where thoughts can grow." He took a deep breath, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability, of uncertainty, in the Iron Duke. I did not seek out the author of that article because I was looking for an intellectual curiosity. I was looking for a partner. Someone who sees the world not just as it is, but as it is structured, as it could be. He took my hands in his. "I do not wish to rescue you from your life, Ilara Ashworth. I wish to ask you to join me in mine. I am asking you to be my wife, to be my duchess, to stand beside me, not behind me, to argue with me about architecture and to share the silence with me for the rest of our days." The tears I had been holding back finally fell, but they were not tears of sorrow or of pain. They were tears of profound, overwhelming relief, of a joy so vast it felt as though it might break me open. He saw me. He had always seen me, the real me, the one who had been hiding in the corner all along. "Yes," I whispered, the single word holding the weight of my entire past and the bright, limitless promise of my future. "Yes, Alistair, yes." A slow smile spread across his face, a true, genuine smile that transformed his severe features into something breathtakingly handsome. It was like watching the sun break through the clouds after a long, hard winter. He leaned down, and his lips met mine. The kiss was not a fiery, passionate affair. It was something far deeper. It was a promise, a confirmation. It tasted of security and of respect and of coming home. It was the end of a very long winter and the first tentative warmth of spring. 1 year later, I stood on the wind-swept ridge overlooking St. Giles Abbey. The wind whipped a loose strand of hair across my face, and I tucked it back behind my ear, my fingers brushing against the cool, heavy gold of the wedding band I now wore. I was Ilara Vance, Duchess of Vance. The title still felt like a borrowed coat, one I had not yet grown into. But the woman I was becoming, that felt like my own skin. Alistair came to stand beside me, wrapping a strong arm around my waist and pulling me against his side. He followed my gaze to the ruins below, where stonemasons were now at work, carefully reinforcing the crumbling arches, preserving the beauty that his brother had so loved. It was my project, my design, a restoration, not a rebuilding. "The buttresses are holding," he observed, his chin resting on the top of my head. "Your calculations were, as always, impeccable." "I had a good consultant," I replied, leaning into his warmth. We stood in comfortable silence for a long while, a silence that was not empty, but full of unspoken understanding. This had become our language, the quiet space between words where our connection truly lived. My father had written to me, a long, rambling letter full of remorse. He and Lady Anya lived in a quiet, diminished retirement in the country. Lavinia had married a respectable baronet, and in her letters often expressed a horrified regret for her years of obliviousness. They were figures from another lifetime, ghosts from a story that was no longer mine. My story was here, in the solid presence of the man beside me, in the shared work of preserving the past and building a future. It was in the grand library at Vance House, where my own desk now sat beside his, our books and papers mingling. It was in his quiet smile when I defeated him in a debate, and in the way his hand always found mine in a crowded room, a silent reassurance that I was there, and he saw me. He had not given me a voice. He had simply been the first person to listen. He had not made me visible. He had been the one with the sight to see past the shadows. In the quiet solitude of his heart, I had found my home. And in the steady, unwavering light of his regard, I had finally learned to see myself.